Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. On this episode, we're going to talk about the Architectural Summit. Recently, an outside firm held an Architectural Summit here on Redmond campus to take and help developers understand the architectural issues of developing .NET applications. I felt it would be a good idea to take and talk with the people that held this event, understand what some of the concepts were that they tried to getting across to the audience, as well as hear from them what some of the questions were and issues that were raised at this event. So we'll get into that later. But before that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. On April 9th, Microsoft announced the latest addition to its Shared Source initiative, the Windows C Shared Source Premium Licensing Program, available to companies that are bringing Windows C-based devices and solutions to market. CP is the first Windows C program under the Shared Source initiative to allow original equipment manufacturers, silicon vendors, and systems integrators full access to Windows C source code. All licensees will be able to modify the code, and OEMs can now commercially distribute these modifications in Windows C-based devices. On April 14th, at the annual RSA conference, Microsoft announced 3 new technology enhancements designed to help antivirus vendors provide customers with deeper levels of protection against viruses and worms, as well as improve the performance of virus scanning engines. These technologies, developed in close collaboration with the antivirus vendor community, include new antivirus APIs for Microsoft Exchange Server 2003, enhanced virus scanning capabilities for Microsoft Office Word 2003, and a new Windows File System Filter Manager architecture designed to simplify the antivirus software development process and improve overall system reliability. April 24th was an important day for product launches. On this day, Microsoft announced the general availability of Windows Server 2003, an integrated server platform that enables customers to improve information technology efficiency, increase user productivity, and build better performing applications faster than ever. Also announced was the availability of Microsoft SQL Server 2000 Enterprise Edition 64-bit, which is designed to support memory-intensive and high-performance applications running on 64-bit versions of Microsoft Windows 2003. And finally, Microsoft announced the general availability of the Microsoft .NET Framework 1.1 and Visual Studio .NET 2003, the latest release of its award-winning application development platform. Also on April 24th, MSDN launched a new homepage, several new developer centers, and other features. The new homepage includes increased performance and a design based on customer feedback. The new developer centers for Visual Studio, Visual Basic, Visual C#, Visual C++, and the .NET Framework provide a home base where you can find all the information and resources relevant to a particular technology area. In addition, MSDN now has RSS feeds and updated code and download centers. Be sure to check out the transcript for links to more information on these news items. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. Like I said, there recently was an Architectural Summit held here in Redmond. And I want to take and share with you some of the insights and aspects about architectural design that we learned from this, as well as what you might need to think about when you're thinking about the architecture of your applications. Joining me here to talk about this is Keith Pleas. You were actually the person that held the Architectural Summit.
Right.
And Mike Berner from the Platform Strategy Group. And Ed, now I'm going to probably massacre this, Ed Jezierski?
Edward Jezierski.
Jezierski. Works pretty well. And you're from the Patterns and Practices group.
Correct.
Focusing on architectural aspects for patterns and practices. So to start off with, Keith, why don't you just kind of tell us, what was this Architectural Summit you held, and what was the purpose, and who all came to it?
Okay. The purpose is the easy one. I actually start back with the pet store, pet shop situation with the Java example, and then the .NET one that came after it, and realized that the first Java version had an actual architecture behind it. When we went to the .NET version, which was done by an outside partner, we did things that we did traditionally as Visual Basic or Visual Studio developers, which is kind of compress everything together, cut out all those intermediate layers, put data handling code in the front end, and so on. And I realized that there's a large number of developers in our traditional Visual Studio community that write these tightly coupled applications, and we needed to find a way to get them, reoriented to building truly enterprise scale applications.
So basically, thinking about architecture.
Right. Now, then architecture is kind of a slippery word with some of these people because they think of themselves as architects because they certainly design their application. They don't think about it often from the standpoint of how it's actually run and deployed and managed. So they have perhaps a narrower focus than people that are building large number of programmers working on one application, most of which doesn't have any visible component to it. And these are things that our traditional developer community just isn't used to really getting their hands around.
Why not?
Well, I could ask some of the Microsoft guys to comment on that, but we've seen demos over the years where I start up Visual Studio, I run a wizard, and I instantly create a 3-tier application, and I call it an enterprise application because it's deployed in the enterprise. But many of these things were actually departmental applications, right? They had a fairly narrow focus to them, and they didn't go out and touch all the things in the accounting system, for example, or all of the sales order tracking and so on. I mean, we were writing apps that were deployed in the enterprise, but they weren't truly enterprise applications.
Now, so an important thing to mention is that you're not a Microsoft employee,
right?
So why exactly are you putting on this summit for architecture for what I would call Microsoft technologies?
Well, I could say I just personally see it as my mission to try and bring all of these people along where I think they should be going. Microsoft themselves doesn't traditionally have this kind of experience even in-house, right? If you look at what they develop in, they all use C++ and now C#. Microsoft develops shrink-wrapped applications and platforms, frameworks. They don't develop business applications. So a lot of the knowledge that goes into creating these things is hard to capture. Corporations aren't really anxious to share how their applications work. I mean, that's their intellectual property, and those are things that they protect. So getting the knowledge of how to build these things is difficult. So I just took it upon myself to try and, like I said, go out and lead the charge.
What a good guy.
Yeah.
So I guess, you kind of bring up some good points there. It's like, what is architecture? I mean, you talked about designing a 3-tier application, deploying, and that really isn't grasping the whole understanding of what architecture is. Even though it looks like architecture, it feels like architecture, and it deploys like architecture.
Right.
So maybe, Mike and Ed, maybe you can kind of fill in, what do you guys see from a Microsoft standpoint when you asked about architecture? What do you define architecture as?
Well, architecture is kind of a complicated term because there are a lot of different kinds of architecture in the information technology space. So there's enterprise architecture, which tries to take a very broad view of how an organization implements its processes and doesn't really get down to code. Then there's application architecture, which is kind of what Keith was talking about when he was talking about architecture, which is how to design applications so that they're extensible, so they're maintainable, so that they integrate well with the other applications in the portfolio, of the organization. And then there's systems architecture, which can kind of further be broken down into like network architecture and security architecture and other specialties. But that's the architecture of that's how to build out a technology base that allows your application portfolio to function effectively, to be trustworthy, to be available, to be secure. And all of those things are very, are used, we apply the term architect and architecture to all of those things, and we're not trying to change that, right? That we legitimately understand that there are different kinds of architecture and therefore different kinds of architects. And so we, I think traditionally have not addressed some of those audiences very well, right? I think that we have made an effort to address the application architects, but have, I think, traditionally not done a very good job of addressing the enterprise architects or the systems architects as well as we might. And so there's a renewed effort within Microsoft to recognize those audiences, engage with them, find out what issues they're facing with our technologies, and then take that feedback in-house and try to make better product, better tools, and better guidelines, just provide better advice as to how to use our technologies to improve business capabilities within your organization.
Mm-hmm. And Ed, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, as Mike said, a lot of the architecture issues come because architecture is really a way of structuring problems. As Mike said, you can structure infrastructure problems and have a systems architecture, business problems. You could even structure problems around the life cycle and the methodology that people use. You could even say you have a process architecture around how people build these solutions and operate them. And I agree that we have mostly been focusing on the coders and the developers in the last years of our platform. And it's a bit with our focus on RAD capabilities of tools and so on. We haven't been able to demonstrate really the capability of our enterprise to run, of our platform to run in enterprise environments. So as we want to start helping enterprises adopt our platform in a better ways, we need to start telling them how they fit, how the tools we have, how the platform we have, the infrastructure and the processes we have fit into their enterprise problems. And architecture is a way to show that from the very top level, matching problems to solutions, and then decomposing that into integration of applications, into application development systems, configuration, and then development and operations methodologies.
And do the concepts of architecture change from platform to platform? Like if I learned architecture about a particular application I was developing on Unix, would I have a different approach I need to focus on for running on Windows and .NET?
Well, this brings up a very interesting question, which is how much does the architecture depend on the underlying systems, right? And generally, architects are starting right now to communicate between themselves in a language that is of patterns, right? And a pattern is basically recurrent solution to a problem within a certain context, right? So you would say that as you develop a real-time system on one platform or on another one, the problem sets that you're trying to address are probably similar, right? And the underlying principles that underpin the solution that you will develop are probably similar too. However, different platforms will have different capabilities and different pre-built solutions and patterns into them that will help you achieve those solutions. So the underpinning of a good available application, right, or of good integration spans platforms. And platforms try to provide the best capability they have to help the people who use them build solutions that have those attributes.
So it'd be more the concern of the programmers in many cases rather than the development than the architects in thinking about that sort of stuff.
No, not really. There's, just like there's a hierarchy of architects, there's a hierarchy of patterns. So, I mean, those same principles, can be applied. You can have patterns for how you build out a portfolio. You can have patterns for how you build out a network. You can have patterns that are true across platforms, as Ed was saying. And then, as he again said, you can have patterns that are idiomatic to a specific platform because they're leveraging the capabilities of that platform. So, I mean, I think it kind of touches at many levels.
I'm going to sort of disagree with that. I think, if you're talking about what's available on a specific platform, that's an implementation issue. And certainly an implementation pattern can take advantage of certain things that are already there in a framework. But drilling down from an architecture standpoint, I think you would design an inventory application, an e-commerce system, and so on, without necessarily worrying about the underlying technology. Yes, you need to know that there's a durable messaging system, that there's a way to communicate, there's a way to secure it, and so on. But actually, how those things happen isn't that important, at least at the initial architectural level.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you're bringing in here is an interesting. There's an implicit assumption that the architecture may be done before taking some implementations, right? This is where the whole discussion about methodology and who takes what decisions when comes in. And definitively, there's a crossfeed between the architecture, design, and implementation levels, right? Such that having a good platform facilitates the implementation of certain patterns. Thus, some certain design patterns may be chosen over on others because you have a good implementation mechanism for it, right? Just like the architecture may constrain and drive what patterns are chosen, the implementation does the same.
And at the top, it's all an economic decision, right? This is all overhead to the business. The business is doing, producing something, providing a service. So they want to achieve all of these things that we want to create for them as cheaply as possible. And a big part of that is they have a lot of stuff, right? They have a legacy, whether it's on a Microsoft platform or another platform, and they want to be able to use those things as much as possible. So architecture isn't necessarily a clean piece of paper. I mean, we have a lot of as-built stuff that we need to work with today and integrate into.
I know both Mike and Ed are focused on trying to provide some architectural guidance to our developers. So for a second, let's just kind of forget they're here right now. And just between you and me, Keith, since you're not part of Microsoft and you've actually been trying to solve some of these problems, where do you think some of the biggest problems are that Microsoft has had in communicating architectural guidance to software developers?
Well, one of the biggest is just literally the title or name or concept of an architect. We have a tool, for example, Visual Studio. They have an Enterprise Architect Edition, and that it has Visio templates and Enterprise templates and so on. But it isn't something that an Enterprise Architect would use to lay out, their entire business infrastructure. We also have a kind of a disconnect between the developer side and the operations side. One of my favorite, I guess, things to mention there. There was a fellow. I was doing some contract work at Microsoft, and there was a fellow with an office near me who was the chief tester for his area, and he had a T-shirt on his door that said, "I don't care if it runs on your machine. We're not shipping your machine." And it's just a construct really of what your vision is and your scope is. And so guys have always had, I need to get my job done, and it's been difficult to stand back and look above and look around and look over into the other side of the house. We very much had the mindset that once we build it and if it compiles, it's somebody else's problem. So Microsoft has two different worlds, I think, that they use to communicate to the community. They have, I'll call them the MSDN world for the developers, and they have TechNet for the IT pros. And you are in one world, and that's where you go to look for things. But there's so much that crosses across there that's difficult to expose for somebody.
Mm-hmm. So we just have a hard time communicating in the right voice to developers and architects out there. Is that what you're kind of getting at, or?
Possibly. The other thing is just alerting them to the fact that they need to know about something. For example, one of the things I learned in the summit that we did is that there are people that will come in and say, what are the patterns that his group is producing? Where do I get them? How do I plug them in? Well, we want to tell you about architecture. I don't need to know that. I just want to plug them in. And they're opportunistic people, and a lot of Microsoft developers.
They're probably not even architects, really.
No, they may say that on their slide or their business card, because that's what that's a title that they have internally, and maybe they are. Maybe they're architecting a solution. I think there's another term that Microsoft's starting to talk about, solutions architects, as opposed to those that deal with enterprise scope things. Probably they're people that are in the design stage. They design certain things, but really they want to implement. They want to build things. They want to get something out the door. They like writing code. They know that there's some things that maybe they're not as good at, and they'd love to be able to plug them in to get back to writing the functional stuff that they should be doing. So Microsoft's providing a lot of very helpful things like data access layers, error handling code, instrumentation code, which I don't want to write every time I write an app, but if I'm writing an insurance application, I want to sit down with the actuary and figure out exactly what information he's looking for and how I manipulate that. And that's something that, they clearly can't package up and give to me.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, and I'll give you a chance to kind of respond to how do you feel your teams are trying to actually fill the void of the architects out there with our platforms?
Sure. Well, I'm on the I'm a member of the .NET Enterprise Architecture team, and as the name suggests, we're really focused on engaging with the senior architects in large organizations, the enterprise architects. And so, one of the things that group wants is to really understand the roadmap. They want to talk about futures. They want to be ready for what's coming. And so, we focus a lot on that. We focus a lot on where, we think the Microsoft platform is going. And sometimes what we say can be kind of disruptive and confusing to people who are more focused on the here and now. And so we have to be kind of careful about that. We have to, we'll talk about, for example, a big focus for us is service-oriented architecture, but it's a set of design principles that right now are not all that easily implemented. Because we're talking about where the technology is going, and so we recognize that application architects are going to hear about this and they're going to say, "Oh, that's really interesting to me. How do I do it today? How do I do it with Visual Studio today?" And we have to have kind of a lot of caveats around that, around what you can and can't do. So my group is trying to provide kind of the big forward-looking picture to a relatively small number of senior architects in these organizations, and we focus on getting together with them. We have events that we invite them to. We go to visit them in their companies, and it's kind of a very high-touch relationship with those senior architects.
It's the sort of thing that since it is such a high touch, should be difficult to do in large numbers, in numbers such as the Architectural Summit and stuff like that, because you're having to do one-on-one interactions, and you're not necessarily a big team, perhaps, or
no, we're not a very big team. I mean, we do have events that are kind of on the same scale as the summit that Keith was talking about, kind of by invitation events. But we couldn't do something at the level of, say, tech ed. We couldn't have 6,000 people come and be able to meaningfully engage with them. So it's the groups are around a couple hundred people we might have in an event, and then we might follow that on with a direct visit to the organization where we can engage with them more deeply.
I think the roadmap thing is interesting because it's all about the time frame that you're making your decisions in. An organization is going to want to bet on a technology and know that if they put their money into it, it's a 10-year investment. In fact, that's one of the things that Visual Basic had going for it. They say, hey, it's been around 10 years, or 11 years actually now. Is C# going to be around that long? Is the .NET framework going to be around that long? Now, as a developer, I can switch directions pretty easily. I could spend 6 months and learn a new language, possibly a new platform. But for an organization, a corporation, an enterprise, to think of making that kind of a switch, they'd be throwing away a ton of investment. So when Mike goes out and talks to people, they need that roadmap. They need to know what's going to come in 2 and 3 years, so they know that they don't have to build a whole, let's say, message architecture because something's going to be coming from Microsoft. The developer who's got to get an app out, within 6 months says, well, I pretty much got to go with what I got, what I know is in beta maybe, and everything else I'm going to have to write myself. So that's a difference in is the nature.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So you ask, what are we doing to help architects, and address the issues that Keith mentioned, right? And I work in the Prescriptive Architecture Guidance Group. It's another small group, and we work very closely with the Mike's group in creating guidance in terms of patterns, papers, code, architectural frames to help people achieve successful solutions now. Right, so the architect is confronted with the roadmap, and he says, "I got to build a solution now. What do I do? I still have to solve this problem in a certain time frame on the current platform." So what our group does is we work with Mike's teams and our consultant teams and many customers directly, and we look at what are the current issues that these architects are having, right? And then we ship solutions in many formats so that they can do that today. And in the development and design of those solutions, we actually take into account where the platform is going and where the roadmap is to make sure that people using patterns and practices are not kind of sent down a dead end in terms of future direction and long-term investment. And one of the gaps you mentioned was the gap between application and operations, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll kind of walk my way inside out from one application, right, to kind of mention some things we are doing right now to help people address those issues in architecture. So the first set of problems an architect is faced with comes when he's developing or designing when he's architecting an application, and he needs to work with his developer so that they work within this architectural frame, right? And so that they build something that conforms to the big architectural patterns that he decided would fit within the enterprise. So to help in that case, there are design patterns mapped to implementation patterns on the .NET platform that help you easily map a problem and solution pair, and how do you build it on .NET. Right? Then there's also some code frameworks, which we call application blocks, which are reusable code that is tested from Microsoft, which represents typical components that developers will have to build in their application on the current version of .NET. Now, as you move up and you start looking beyond just the application code, but more into the infrastructure and the system that this application will be running in, right? You need to start considering how some aspects cross-cut both the application and the system, things like security, like operations management, things like communication. Any decision done in security has to be very clearly communicated to both the application architects and the systems architect, because they have so much dependencies on each other. So in the patterns and practices guides that we do, we take real care, first of all, to test any kind of developer guidance on top of a system that represents what our customers are doing, and also to test system guidance with applications that represent the type of application customers are doing, and to take into account this negotiation of trade-offs and restrictions between the system and the application to help people make the right choices, considering the factors that come from both angles. Then as you move up and you have the systems running certain applications on top of them, you have to take care of running a portfolio of applications in an enterprise that are communicating with each other, right? So as you start talking about application integration, you have to start thinking about how do these things like communication, security, and management happen across a set of applications? How do you have many applications maybe built on different platforms interoperate and communicate and draw the right boundaries amongst themselves so that your enterprise has a set of systems that can grow at their own pace and basically be optimal at any point in time within the roadmap of products that come from the companies.
One of the things that I think you guys have put together is a complete security specification, how to build secure ASP.NET applications. And I think it's something like 600 pages. I mean, it's soup to nuts how to do it. And then developers look at FM stocks and Duwamish. These are samples that ship with a couple of versions of Visual Studio.NET, and you look at the security model there, and they say, well, it just uses forms authentication, and none of no IPsec, no encryption, no whatever, because the average developer has got a single machine and can only set up a relatively small environment. So if you said, hey, to run this sample, you need 3 machines and a firewall and different addresses and so on, then that's probably not something that they can work with. So it's a problem because you want to build these advanced applications. You want to head in that direction, but you're not given a huge data center to just play on either. So that's why these guidelines are particularly important, because they remove a lot of that experimentation that the developer just can't do.
Now, how exactly do people get a hold of your guidelines?
Well, there's many ways. The most typical way is to go to msdn.microsoft.com/practices and actually download the different types of guides we have there. We have 4 types. There's reference architectures, which are a kind of broad-scoped guidelines that cover things like security, like how to build a internet-facing data center, an enterprise data center, and so on. Then there's reference building blocks, which are kind of building blocks of guidance that may cover a particular problem area or have a code for a particular problem area. Then there's operational guides in the same site where they can get information on how to do those tasks and processes that they have to go about when architecting and building their apps. And off the same site, you will be able to soon access the the patterns that represent the architecture, design, and implementation patterns for an enterprise system that we will be populating continuously from Microsoft.
Are you going to have some sample applications that show how these things work?
Yes, and I'll qualify that. I'll say there won't be necessarily sample applications. There'll be reference applications, right? And
what's the difference?
Well, we think that the difference is important especially because customers get a lot of products from Microsoft, and these products want to showcase their abilities, right? And so a way to do that is to show an application that uses those abilities. Now, whenever a customer is confronted with an application, he has to ask himself, what can I use here to learn about how a feature works or how to implement something on this product or framework or whatever? And what in here is best practice for my whole organization's development, right? And we believe that you cannot necessarily support the same things, both things, in one application every time. It's very hard, for example, to show an example of how to use SQL XML from an application, right? And that all the issues that would make it a reference from which you want to model when designing your applications for your enterprise. So we want to distinguish sample applications, which help you understand the use of features in a context, right? And that illustrate the use of features, right? From a reference application that shows a more restricted set of features being used, but being used in the right context with the right architecture, design, implementation, and set of documentation around it. And once we've qualified that, reference applications by all means. We're working on a set of reference applications right now, which will incorporate the best use of the platform on a Visual Studio, right, for the scenario they're trying to tackle, right, and also incorporate the use of application building blocks in a context so that people can see a set of these working together with the framework capabilities, like you mentioned, instrumentation and so on.
So Keith, how important do you think those tools are in moving forward in assisting architecture, and are they enough?
Well, they're a good step in the right direction. Microsoft, as he says, is going out and talking to customers in the real world. These aren't things that just somebody came up with on their own, and that's important. We'll also need stuff coming from other people outside of Microsoft that are going to comment on this and say this is great, or here's how it can be extended, or for example, here's how to integrate it with J2E platform. I don't know that I'd see that kind of integration guidance coming from Microsoft, but that's certainly something that's facing a lot of enterprises with now legacy Java applications. It's a good step. I think also the tools have to change to be able to use this stuff. Right now today, it's fairly difficult to create an enterprise template, for example, in Visual Studio. So it'd be really nice for an architect type or a chief designer to be able to create a project that the people working on his team would use consistently, that would use consistent practices and naming and all that good stuff. But that's very difficult to create right now. So we're looking at just a few very generalizable things that come with the product, but it'd be nice to have much more specific things, especially things that were tailored to specific industries, HIPAA, for example, financial, and so on.
Now, earlier on, you kind of mentioned that Microsoft itself doesn't really have the same level of experience writing enterprise-level applications. I mean, we make products. We write Excel and Office and Windows and stuff like that, which is different than what most enterprises are developing internally themselves. Do you feel that Microsoft is the right place for architectural guidance to come out of, or do you think there's opportunities where maybe other people that maybe are working out in enterprises should be providing some of this architectural guidance as well?
A combination of the two. I mean, it's certainly nice to have a Microsoft endorsement of it, and it goes both ways. The larger organizations, for example, don't listen to the vendor. When the vendor says this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, they're just I'm going to wait. They may read about it in a weekly, the trade magazines. A lot of them rely on the expertise of Gartner, Forrester, Meta Group, and so on. And so you need that independent kind of vetting of it. Flip it around the other way and you say, who is going to know how best to put a .NET application together? And that's going to be Microsoft. So on the flip side, I'd like to see Microsoft say, this is the right way to structure these things. And if you build that, it's going to be something that we will support going forward. That's the other bit of it, is I don't want to just lose my investment here. I want it to be something that carries forward. I think it's a combination of the two.
If I could extend on that a little bit, Microsoft isn't necessarily the best place to come for certain patterns, right? That there are a lot of people out there who are customers of ours or systems integrators who use our technology that actually build a lot more solutions on our platform than we ourselves build on our platform. And so we're really interested in garnering the knowledge from that community and really get people to contribute and help each other with the things that they have found that work and don't work, and how to best solve problems on our platform. So there are a couple of efforts going on to really create an architect community that can exchange ideas. Probably the one that is most interesting is the got.net site that the Visual Studio team kind of fosters. And that has a lot of community-contributed guidance on experiences with .NET, and has just recently opened a patterns portal that allows...
Yesterday.
Yeah, that allows the community to contribute patterns so that they can be shared among each other. And so we really recognize that the best advice comes from probably the broadest audience, or the broadest set of practitioners, and we want to help get that information spread as well. So.
One of the things to look at in the Java community, there's a place called the serverside.com, and if you go there, you'll see people talking about MVC and facade and observer and all of these design patterns that or actually there'll be implementations and so on coming from PAG. So the Java community has a history of talking about and designing and building these things. We need that same kind of body of knowledge in those that are familiar with the Microsoft platform and tools. And so that's one of the key goals, I think, of that portal, is to get people up to speed on how all these things can be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, what I'd like to do is take and switch and start actually diving into what some of the issues are that people raised at your architectural summit,
okay,
and responding to some of those. But I'll save that for the second half of the show.
Okay.
So let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about what some of the real questions were the people at the architectural summit came up, and we'll kind of find out what some of the answers of my guests might be for those questions. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. Now, in this segment, we're going to take and try to focus more on the Q&A surrounding architectural guidance, specifically some of the questions that came up at the recent Architectural Summit. Joining me this time is Chris Kinsman, sitting in for Keith. And joining me back again is Mike Berner and Ed
Wiechers.
Good enough. So, Chris, now you work with Keith, and you helped him out at the Architectural Summit.
Right. There were actually 4 of us that put on the Architecture Summit. Myself, Keith, Yuval Lowy, and another gentleman. Actually, I can't think of his name off the top of my head right now.
Well, you'll think of it later.
Yeah,
and just kind of pop in with it. And I understand also you have more of these summits planned in the future?
Correct. We have one planned right now for October, and we're going to kind of try to address a little bit some of the split that we had before. Mike was talking earlier that there's kind of these 2 groups of people, as it were. We definitely saw that with the summit. We saw that there was definitely a group of people who were more the enterprise architects who were looking for more long-term guidance, more of a higher level type of how do I plan out and where's the roadmap for where we're going in the future. And we're planning a day initially to speak with those folks. And then we also have a group of folks that are more of the solution architects, more of the folks that are in there doing the tactical stuff today, need more of 6 to 8 month type guidance. What are we going to do tomorrow in terms of bringing our application onto this architecture? And we're going to be doing 3 days of mostly pattern-based stuff for those folks.
Mm-hmm. Now, I assume you've got an awful lot of interaction and feedback from people at this summit. What were some of the major issues you felt were common amongst all the architects at the summit?
Right. Yeah, we did get quite a few questions. After every session would end up, it seems like people would try and buttonhole us for another hour or so, and so consequently trying to keep things on schedule was tough. Probably one of the most common overriding questions we had initially was, now that we're moving into this .NET world and we're kind of moving away from DNA, which is what we've been doing kind of for the last 3 years or so, how do we take our existing applications and either integrate them into the new world of .NET, or how do we look at ways to migrate various pieces of those applications into a .NET story? And, how do we make those decisions?
Mm-hmm. Now, Mike, maybe you can kind of respond to that question, pretend like some of the audience asked you. Okay, you were talking about Windows DNA, and now you're talking about .NET. What's going on here? What's the shift?
Well, I think that you can look at .NET as an evolution of Windows DNA, and that you can, treat, much of the componentry that you built on a DNA architecture as, that you can wrap it essentially, that you can create more loosely coupled solutions around the tightly coupled DNA implementations. But I think that there are some aspects of the DNA architecture which we felt maybe were overly generic, right? That needed that we really needed to provide better guidance about different types of applications, and like the PAG reference architectures, are going in that direction. The MSA, different data center designs, right, are looking at for different sizes of solutions, you really have a different scope of problems. It's not just a matter of, you need more of them, right? It's you really need to implement them differently. And so, partly, it's evolutionary, right? And partly it's a recognition that, our thinking has matured, right? And that, we really need to architect a little differently depending upon the application.
Mm-hmm. So, the key thing is that it's not so much that Windows DNA has really gone away. It's just that .NET is actually providing a foundation to continue evolving the same notion that started with Windows DNA.
Yeah, I think it's it's an expansion of the abstraction model. I mean, like when I talk to people about what we mean by a service-oriented architecture, it's not that means that object orientation is gone and that we don't want people to use object orientation, and it's not that we want people to even stop using distributed objects, right? That the history of the kind of computing development model and the architecture for computing is really to come up with ways to encapsulate greater and greater complexity. And so, the architecture, the last architecture is the component model, right, of the new architecture. And so, we continue to expand that paradigm and to allow you to kind of encapsulate more and more functionality behind a component model, and that's the direction that we're going with services.
Mm-hmm. So, Ed, does that kind of match some of the patterns that your team is coming out with of focusing on the evolution of Windows DNA, but focusing on more of it from a .NET standpoint?
Exactly. If you look at Windows DNA, there's 2 things that pop to mind. First of all, it's presentation, business, and data. right? And that was how we told people to structure applications coming from a client-server world. And also there was this kind of fuzzy notion that you should always deploy these things in different tiers, right? So people kind of implied a deployment architecture from this architecture, right? And what .NET does is exactly what Mike said, right? Kind of steps back and looks at the scope not only helps you build an application that you would have built using DNA before, but also helps you fill out the space between applications, enabling services that are isolated to talk to each other, right, through standards. And that is reflected in the guidance, right? You will see guidance such as reference architecture for a line of business application, which is one of the application types you were mentioning, that says, okay, let's actually drill down into that presentation, business, and data separation, which is a common practice across the industry. And let's actually think about the types of components and patterns and frameworks that actually fill this type of line of business application, right? The portal applications may have a slightly different set of practices and patterns and frameworks that support them and support their attributes: security, scalability, availability, and so on. And then all these different types of application architecture can be deployed according to the scenario and the needs on different infrastructure architectures. They don't need to be a mandatory distinguishing between the business layer and being on a business tier and the presentation layers being on a presentation tier, right? We realize that the factors that drive deployment are more about dependency, security, operations, and so on. And that is considered in the guidance, and saying these are the factors why you should put things in a different tier, and here's why you should not, rather than coming in with one big mandate.
Mm-hmm. So now the real test, Chris, is that the same answer they got at the summit?
Very similar, actually. I think one of the other things that we followed onto that, though, is a lot of people had the erroneous assumption that moving to .NET meant leaving DNA behind, and that it really meant that they really had to rewrite those portions of their application that were still in the DNA world. And one of the other messages they got, that that's not exactly correct. In fact, that's stuff that works and works well today, theoretically, for them. And they need to come up with ways potentially to interoperate with that and actually continue to work within that framework of the DNA world and then extend it using .NET.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose one of the key aspects is, thinking about the architect of application is thinking about what works well.
Right.
And so if they've architected their application in one way and that works well for them,
correct,
why change it to something else?
Exactly. It's code that's tested, it's debugged, and it works today. Why go and rewrite that and potentially introduce new bugs and introduce new problems?
Mm-hmm.
Right. On the flip side, right, you could say that as your business evolves, you need to start bringing in more attributes into those systems. Things like you want this application over here really to start working with this other application in this other department. So as you start to bring in extra attributes, you want to increase scalability or availability, and want to improve on the security story, right? You want to start integrating and having interop with other applications or maybe even partners, right? You start finding compelling reasons to move parts of the application to .NET. Now, one of the nice things about .NET is that it is about interoperability, right? So, of course, you need to have a strategy on how you choose to cut and slice your application, right, vertically, horizontally, etc., to migrate the right pieces at the right time to get those things that you want from the business side.
Right. So you brought up a good point about the interop there. Moving forward, it seems that Microsoft with this .NET and the other platforms with their various other things as well are focusing an awful lot on making interop, part of the platform. Would something like that make it so the architects would have to worry less and less about interop and just kind of assume that, okay, interop happens here and I'll let the programmers figure out how to do it? Or do they still need to think about interop very carefully within the architecture?
Well, there's two steps to that. First of all, interop is not something that can be just delegated to the developers in all instances, because interoperability happens at many levels. There's interoperability at the business level, in which this department needs to work in a certain business process with this other department, right? Sharing customers and data and processes. At another level, the technical level, you need to make sure that these things share protocols, share formats, share a way of communicating reliability expectations or security expectations, and so on, right? So what the platform is doing and where the platforms and tools are going is in helping architects express the business requirements for the interoperability at the business level, saying, well, for this process, I need to send this here, send this there, and they need to exchange this type of data in this way, and then help the architect choose standards that will help implement that interoperability so that developers work within that policy and within that frame that the architect set for them, rather than having to figure it out all from scratch, really doing something that fits within the larger frame of the enterprise.
So it's interop is more than just the fact that these two disparate systems can connect to each other, but you've actually got the information passing between them that needs to be thought of as well. That, .NET to a certain extent can't handle all those sorts of things. We can handle the connections through web services, but we can't make sure that the data packets being passed back and forth clearly do work well on both ends of the system.
Right, and there's a lot of work going on right now on standards that help us define how the applications set expectations with each other and communicate how they share security, how they share reliable messaging, transactional expectations, and so on, so that many disparate systems built at different teams, maybe in different time frames, can talk and share these expectations and communicate them clearly. Right, and also so that it's not reinventing the wheel every time one application talks to another one.
So one of the key messages that we have for the architects is integration by design, right? Including upfront as one of the key factors that you think about when designing an application is how it's going to be able to integrate with the rest of the IT assets in your organization, as well as opening up the possibility for integration with your customers, your partners, your suppliers, and making it work with their systems. And that we recognize that in any large organization, heterogeneous systems, that is, a network of systems from different vendors, from different software vendors, as well as hardware. It's just a reality, right? And then even for smaller organizations, as soon as you talk about going, outside the organization, again, heterogeneity is just an absolute reality. It's going to be there. And so if we want to be able to integrate, we have to be able to interop. Right?
So even if it's not part of the original requirements documentation, you should just assume that the minute you release the application the first time, one of the first questions you're going to get is, oh, I need to interop.
Right. How does it plug in with this?
Yeah. Yeah. So what other sort of questions came up at the summit then?
There were some of the perennial ones that we'll kind of stay away from, but one of the most common ones was, as I'm choosing some of these ways to integrate, what types of things am I going to pick? What are my decision points? Do I want to use web services? Do I want to use remoting? What value does DCOM still bring to me in the .NET world, where I might not think that DCOM is actually perhaps a first-class protocol, that's more part of the DNA world?
I mean, the DCOM question I think is a pretty good one because not that long ago we were using DCOM as our kind of our interop model, and now web services and remoting has kind of taken that over. What sort of responses you guys have to the whole DCOM question?
Well, I would first say that you're right. People are presented with a spectrum of choices, right? And that the decisions, right, that the factors that make you decide on one versus another one have to start at the very highest level, looking at the application from the outside and saying, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to communicate two pieces of code that are really parts of different applications, maybe managed by different people, that I really want to integrate, right, and establish clear boundaries on, that rely on industry standards, right? Well, in that case, the answer is web services, right? And that's a way of getting that loose coupling yet integration that you're after between systems that do not belong together, right? Then the next step comes, now that if I'm not really trying to integrate something, but really try to establish a communication channel between 2 points, what are the attributes I'm after in that communication? For example, how much do I expect security attributes like authentication to flow through? Do I expect to be able to have Windows be able to impersonate the identity that comes through on subsequent calls? I'm expecting transactions to flow through this communication channel. Right now, DCOM is a protocol that supports all these things automatically with the platform. So if you have a COM+ application that initiates a transaction and you want to call another component that is on the same application but maybe in a different layer, right, or a different tier, and you need to flow transaction context and that both things happen in the same transaction, DCOM is your answer, right? Same thing with impersonation across to other services and so on. Now, if you don't need those attributes, or if you're willing to develop them on your own, or if you need to develop them on your own because of the standards of your industry, you can use remoting. Right? Remoting is very extensible, so it lets you do your own channels and formatters and so on. And it doesn't rely on so many operations and configurations things as DCOM does. So if you're trying, for example, to communicate a smart client application, which you own, with a back-end set of components, and you don't need to draw a boundary there for loose interoperability for the future, remoting could be a good answer, because you could own the protocol and the format choices on both ends, right? And that's pretty much the roadmap.
So it sounds like you said you got a choice.
Yeah, you got a choice. Integration with web services. I need security provided by the platform, or I need transaction flow. It's DCOM, but it comes with certain liabilities like configuration and so on. If I control both endpoints and I have a choice of protocol and format, I can use remoting. And then the catch-all situation is building your own remoting channels and so on to support the underlying communication. Now, you have to expect that Microsoft will be investing a lot in the area of web services standards and implementation and communication channels. So if you're really trying to kind of bet on the future, I would first look at the standards that are out there on web services and try to implement the communication on web services rather than remoting.
And that's the problem I think people are fighting right now. Essentially, they want to do integration. They know they're going to have to talk to other applications. But at the same time, they can't give up flowing identity and transactional context and things like that. So they're faced with this problem of, if I use web services today because GXA isn't all the way there yet, I kind of give up some of these things. And what is the infrastructure I have to build now? And potentially, how can I do it in such a way that I don't put out a lot of effort that's going to be nullified essentially as GXA comes along and goes ahead and gives me some of those capabilities? So
Yeah, because moving forward, GXA is specifically trying to address all of those problems.
Many of them.
But just not today.
And in many of the server systems that Microsoft ships, Windows Server, SQL, BizTalk, there's a huge investment in implementing that so that the individual organization doesn't have to build out that infrastructure. So, across a number of products, we're making a big effort to make it, to make web services as easy as DCOM, right? And kind of reduce the decision tree.
Is this a big problem, you think, for architects in seeing this a la carte selection of different technologies and trying to figure out what they want? I mean, I remember from the past with our data access with ODBC and ADO and who knows what else out there. The big question was, okay, should I be using JET? Should I be using ODBC or RDO or ADO or what should I be using for data access? And now we kind of have the same problem now with remoting and stuff like that.
Right. That's a problem Microsoft historically gives to developers, i.e. here's 5 million different ways to do this.
Is that a good thing or bad?
Well, in some cases it's good because it does give you a lot of options. But in the past, one of the things I think they've been particularly poor at, i.e. Microsoft, has been in terms of giving guidance as far as what the decision points are for choosing each one of those technologies. Kind of as Ed just went down the list of, here's why you would choose web services, here's why you would choose remoting, here's why you might choose DCOM. Historically, that type of guidance hasn't been given, and that's one of the nice things that's coming out of the PAG group nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So we have a place up on MSDN where it clearly identifies all those points?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, specifically the remoting one is on a paper called Application Architecture for .NET, Designing Applications and Services. And you'll see more and more of this guidance expressed both in the patterns and application blocks and reference building blocks that will be coming out there. Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm. It seems like developers today, with that particular decision point, they tend to get caught up in the whole idea of what's the best performing option. Similar to what they did in the ADO, ODBC, RDO world, as opposed to looking at the bigger picture that Ed kind of espoused, i.e., what's my end goal? Do I need to integrate with other systems? Or is it that I need to be able to flow identity or flow transaction? Two very different differentiating points other than performance.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there's a whole new set of problems that come in once you start considering the infrastructure and operation side as well, right? So we talked about many things from the application side, but some of them I hinted at, for example, the configuration issues. With DCOM, it's not as simple to configure as remoting. And that means that some architectural or design or implementation decisions have an impact on the operations. And we need to link those two together, right? So, for example, you mentioned the guide we have out there, which is building secure ASP.NET applications, right? We have a new guide around security coming out soon, which tackles the security issue from another angle, which is threats and countermeasures. It really helps you analyze your application, analyze the infrastructure, analyze the network in which that lives, and help you run through checklists that help you lock down everything. Now, what we learn as we do this guidance and our beta customers apply it is that these things have to be carefully negotiated between the infrastructure guys and the application guys because some decisions impact both. right? So they need to be negotiated the right way. And I think that now we are much better at considering all these factors when building the guidance for all the audiences.
So, another question.
Another question that we were faced with, of course we got the sticky one of which one was better, VB or C# that we tried to walk our way around and not really answer by and large. Other questions folks had were also in terms of just interoperating with other systems. What's going to happen, for example, as I use web services to integrate with other systems, and I'm going to be tying in perhaps to various Java app server implementations, and what happens as I move on to GXA? And the GXA implementations perhaps differ across those platforms.
Before we get to that question, let's deal with that VB C# question.
Yeah, sure.
Just from an architectural standpoint, does it make any difference if I'm an architect thinking through a solution whether or not that solution is going to be developed in VB, C# or some other language, or is it language agnostic?
Well, I think that we've done a very good job of making it possible to get to the full power of the platform, whether you choose VB.NET or C#. I think that the architect in an organization is probably going to want to standardize on one or the other, right? That building a large-scale solution where you say, oh, the developers can just decide for themselves whether they want to write in VB or C# doesn't make for very good maintainability, right? So, a real-world, enterprise architect is probably going to say, we're going to use this one or we're going to use that one. But
the decisions he makes isn't going to be different depending upon which language he decides to standardize on.
No. And, the decision that is made about what language to write in is probably going to be based primarily on the existing skills of the developers in his organization. If it's a shop that largely has VB developers, then that would probably be the choice being made. If it's a shop that largely has C or C++ developers, then they would probably use C# or even manage C++.
Which I think the interesting part of that answer, it seems like when most people come to me and ask that question, they're looking for a technical reason to pick one or the other. And the answer isn't a technical answer.
Right,
right.
Like that, yeah.
It's not a technical answer. It's more about a business answer, i.e., what are the developers in my group currently familiar with? Or what's the job market look like out there? As I have to build this team and actually grow it out as I get farther and farther along in my particular application development, which guys can I hire easier?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the other question, then, if you repeat that.
The other question was, kind of tied in with the whole interop scenario. As I'm moving forward, let's say I've picked web services, and I'm moving into an area where I have to interop with other applications. As GXA gets built out, when are we going to start seeing GXA implementations from some of these other vendors? And are there going to be any? And how well are they going to interop? That's a big concern because while GXA gives us great things, even today in the WYSI toolkit for doing things like security and things along those lines, what happens now when I have to talk to some Java-based server and want to use similar types of security implementations?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a very strong commitment to making the solutions built on on the web services architecture, which I think is what we're now calling GXA, right. To make them implementable and get them to be implemented by multiple vendors, and to make sure that those implementations are interoperable. The specifications that the web services architecture team does are always done in collaboration with other organizations. We've worked a lot in particular with IBM, but we've also worked with VeriSign and other companies, and I don't want to say something wrong, so I'm not going to toss out any more, but on those specifications, to make sure that we're not just putting out something that nobody else, buys into, right? To make sure that they have a commitment to implementing against them. I'm confident that we'll see, and we actually really already have seen implementations of things like WS security from other vendors. And then the other part of it is that we, in collaboration with a number of organizations, again including IBM, form the Web Services Interoperability Organization, WSI, which is really committed to testing the stacks, the web services stacks against each other, to make sure that they interpret the specifications the same way, that in fact, one message being produced from, the BEA implementation of the web services stack can be consumed and understood by the Microsoft or by, the Oracle or by the IBM implementations of the web services stack. And that organization has been very successful. A lot of companies, most of the major systems vendors have joined, and it's very promising for the future of the web services technologies.
I mean, the whole purpose of web services is for this interop to go on, and if we were to put something in there that couldn't be supported in interop fashion, we'd be defeating the entire purpose of it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Oh, we had some other ones. One of the great ones that I got that I thought was interesting is all of a sudden folks are starting to see a resurgence of the smart client, or the thick client, or rich client, as you might want to call it. It seems like things have all been about web applications by and large for the last 2 to 3 years. And so we had a lot of people come up to us kind of asking, well, we're seeing some really new interesting things in terms of hrefxes and things like that in .NET. And kind of what are some of the decision points for, do I decide to build this as a web front end, or did I decide to do this as a rich client, thick client front end? And, how do I kind of make those two work together and interoperate?
Mm-hmm. Well, Microsoft has, never lost belief in the power of the client. And I think that we see it being even more true today as we get, smaller and smaller devices with more power. We realize, that there's just an enormous amount of opportunity for that computing power at the edge of the network. And so we're shipping, technologies to make it possible, to make it easier to build solutions that run on the client, and to try to make it as easy as possible to port solutions from between clients of different capabilities, right? So, for example, we have both the .NET Framework, which runs on Windows or embedded Windows, and the .NET Compact Framework, which runs on these smaller devices, that have perhaps less memory or less, CPU horsepower. And so, but the .NET Framework is a pure the Compact Framework is a pure subset of the .NET Framework, making it very easy to kind of scale your application down to the Compact Framework, because you don't have to, the calling conventions are absolutely the same. You don't have to rewrite stuff. You just have to decide on a case-by-case, on a, kind of device-by-device basis, what are the real use cases here, right? And then preserve those. So, for example, you might have an organization that uses small devices like say an HP CE device to go, for delivery people who are going around to different stores and keeping track of what the stores need and what's been delivered to them and what the status of accounts receivable are there, and then come back and sync that up, right? And so they can take this information, on this small device, around to all of these remote locations where they won't be connected to the network, gather the information using technologies like the .NET Compact Framework and SQL for CE, and then come back to the home office, right, and be able to reconnect to the network and load the information into the system. So we believe, very strongly in that. But, the decision tree, I don't know if I have a simple one. I don't know if Ed can give such a succinct decision tree as he did before. You have to look at your business case, look at your business processes, say, this is how our organization really implements this process, and therefore, we have a case for a client that is that performant or that mobile, right, in order to make it possible for us to get our business done. I mean, an example of, say, a performant client would be a trading desktop, right? I think that, people can imagine how frustrating it would be to, use a web front end with, the page reload metaphor when, you have these tenths of a second decision points that you have to make when trading in securities. And, that is an example of an industry that typically invests heavily in smart clients that do their computing on the local device because they want the performance, the UI performance that smart clients can give them.
Right, and I would like to add to that also, recently kind of got to an interesting point in completing some Microsoft visions when we shipped the tablet PC, right? So not only the power, but also the ability to be where the user is, providing a rich experience is important, right? Now, as you said, it's about choosing the right use cases that make sense from the business standpoint, having close to the user, right? But now if we shift the focus a bit and go into technology, it brings some issues, things like deployment, right? You got to get those applications out there. Things like security. Where does information live? How is information communicated across a wire, and how secure is that? Management and monitoring, and giving the user a good experience in a decentralized environment, right? And in PAG right now, we're doing a set of projects to do both two things. First of all, help people understand what does it imply to make a decision of smart client versus non-smart client, right? And in terms of what does it really affect in my application and what it does not, right? And that is because many people think they have to do it all over again. And if you do things right, even things that control how the UI work, can be reused across both, right? If you've done your designs the right way. And also help them mitigate some of the issues that come with a decentralized and distributed environment, things like the deployment, configuration, and security, right? In an environment that not only is decentralized, but also may be disconnected at times, which has a whole new set of challenges, right? The whole idea is to enable people new experiences with rich computing power close to them. Imagine people collecting patient information at a hospital, walking around with a tablet PC, right? And the amount of power of processing and analysis they have right there, while working in an environment which has connection available to it, right? Applications have to be designed this way, but doesn't change everything. It changes only some things, and we're trying to help customers with those.
Okay. Well, brings us to the end of the show. Thanks you guys for joining us. I'd like a couple last words from each one of you. Chris, if someone wanted to go to your October Architecture Summit, where could they get more information about that?
Go to www.guideddesign.com. We have a link off there that links them to a bunch of information about the types of topics we'll be presenting. I don't think we have an agenda up there quite yet, but there will be one up there soon. And there's a link off to a registration page from there. Right now the plan is to have it around, I can't remember which week in October. I believe it's the second week. This will be the third week in October, I believe.
And if some architect came to you and said, where can I go to get more information about understanding Windows architectural design, where would you point them to?
I know the Architecture Center on MSDN is great, as well as the PAG area up on MSDN right now is also real good. Okay.
And Mike, where would you point people at for more further information?
Well, most of what we publish actually goes to the MSDN Architecture Center. So, www.msdn.com/architecture.
And all the links will be at the bottom of the transcript, so they'll be able to.
And I just misspoke, didn't I? It's actually msdn.microsoft.com/architecture. I'm sorry, I've made that mistake before. Yes, and all the the documents are featured there. The other place that I would encourage people to go, that hasn't been mentioned, or at least not directly, is got.net.com to where there's a very rich community and a lot of discussions around the right way to build these applications.
And I think the community aspect is really important. I mean, getting a chance to talk to your peers and other people and just kind of exchange ideas. It's not even so much asking questions, but just kind of participating in the environment, I think is extremely important for understanding things like this.
Mm-hmm. The .NET team has a number of blogs up there right now. They're actually really interesting reading as far as what's kind of going on in terms of their thinking and how they're looking at some of these problems, which are real interesting reading on a daily basis.
And Ed, do you have anything to add on pointers so people go to more information?
I would say look at msdn.microsoft.com/architecture, look at the Patterns and Practices site. Some things are easier to read on paper and to earmark around, so you can also go to shop.microsoft.com and get some of these Patterns and Practices references in print, so you can actually mark them up and thrash them around.
And if I could ask either one of you guys, or all three of you guys, if you could send me email specifically identifying any specific documents you feel are the most important ones for people to read. Maybe I'm sure you each have your 3 or 4 different documents that, if you read nothing else, at least read these few. Send those to me and I'll include those in the transcript as well.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. Hopefully this gave you a little bit more insight of what it means to be an application architect, what Microsoft is doing to support the understanding and education of architects, as well as what outside firms are doing to assist in this whole process as well. Thanks for joining us.
Well, in this segment, we've had people from various technical areas of Microsoft, and with me today is somebody from a very distinct and different organization at Microsoft. With me is Andrew Locke. He is Director of Multimedia of MSNBC.com.
Well, thanks for having me.
Andrew, welcome.
Thanks.
So why don't you start by telling us what it means to be Director of Multimedia at MSNBC.com?
Well, we're the department within MSNBC.com that's responsible for all of the pictures, all of the audio, all the video, a lot of the flash presentations that you see on the news website. So we're a relatively small team within MSNBC.com, only 10 people, but we do a lot of the work that you see other than text is our doing.
I noticed that, for example, which we should talk about a little bit later, how busy you've been lately with all the recent current events, but they had, during different segments of presenting information about the war, you had a lot of interactive maps and a lot of interactive programs. So your team, it builds all those. Yeah,
we build a lot of that. There are a number of teams within MSNBC that contribute to the products, and we work really closely together. And if someone on one team has an idea that they wouldn't be able to do, they'll just bring it up to whoever, is the expert in that area. And, we've got a really small, close-knit family who puts that website together. And, it's a really creative atmosphere, and we're really, it's really exciting for us to be able to just kind of think up an idea of a new way to tell a story, like the interactive map that we did during Iraq, where you were able to follow the day's events, but you were able to roll it back day by day and see what happened yesterday and the day before. And that's the kind of thing that we can do on the internet that no other medium can do. And that's one of the things that we always strive to do is we don't want to just replace what newspapers do or what television does. We want to synthesize the best of that, and then add all kinds of other features that are useful to the public that we can do that other mediums can't.
So besides being able to offer these multimedia features, what are some other ways that you see that online media is different from other types of publications? Well,
the one of the biggest differences is that just by virtue of the fact that we're on demand all the time, any time that you come to our website, we're going to tell you the news up to the minute, but we're going to start at the beginning. And that's a big difference between us and television, for example, where you might turn it on and it's already happened, and they're on talking about something else, and you missed, a big part of the story. Another thing that we're able to do is really deep interaction with our users. And it's a pretty phenomenal thing when you're as large as we are and have the user base that we do. For example, a live vote, pretty simple technology where people can just register their opinion about an issue, and we can aggregate, tens or hundreds of thousands of people in a very short period of time. And we like to point out that they're not statistically valid, but it's a pretty fascinating thing to see, people voting on an issue in the news.
Right. So why do you say that they're not statistically valid?
Well, they're not designed to be, technically hack-proof. Mm-hmm. We had a situation.
I don't want to mention that, but
well, it's a nice thing for the users. And trying to build it in a way that is going to protect against everything is difficult.
But it is pretty cool that you can, like you said, real time offer this instant news story, and then, like with the war with Iraq, you had these opinion polls, and the questions changed all the time.
Yeah.
And you can offer those and see, day by day, minute by minute, where the country's thinking.
Absolutely, and it's a really fascinating thing to watch, especially during during such a divisive and controversial issue as the war was, to see the opinions sway back and forth on our site. So yeah.
So tell us some other stories about what it was like covering the war. I imagine it was just probably one of your busiest times ever.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't exactly comparable to 9/11 because there wasn't the shock. 9/11 took us by surprise just like it did everyone else, and the Iraq War was something that we could see coming, and it was something that we kind of winced, and waited for. But like any big story, it's what we live to do. You get energized to work long hours and to make sure that the literally millions of people who are pouring onto the website a day are getting the absolute best possible presentation and look at a complex issue. We did 75 million video streams during the war.
Wow.
And the desire by people to really get into the content that we had about the war, pieces from our journalists, NBC journalists in the field, Newsweek journalists in the field, the appetite was voracious, and we were really successful, I think, in being able to provide that.
Mm-hmm. So what is the relationship or differences between the MSNBC.com website and the cable channel?
Well, we're both part of the same joint venture between Microsoft and NBC News. The MSNBC.com website is based here in Redmond on the Microsoft campus, while the cable station is based out in Secaucus, New Jersey. The two organizations, are one in a lot of different ways. I mean, we share the same correspondence. We share a lot of the same content. A lot of what they do on television shows up on the website as video streaming format. But there are a few differences in that we make separate editorial decisions. For example, our lead story during any given time might be a little bit different than their lead story at any given time. And that has a lot to do with who we think our audience is compared to who we think the cable audience is.
Are there main differences between those two?
Yeah, I mean the biggest difference is that people who watch cable during the day are at home primarily, and our big traffic comes during that same period, about 6 a.m. Pacific to say 2 or 3 in the afternoon Pacific time. But those people are at work, and they have different needs, they have different priorities. I mean, a person at work is coming in. They may only have 4 or 5 minutes to check up on what's going on in Iraq, before they have to run off to a meeting. So, we're always keeping that in mind, that, we need to get information out clearly and quickly and in a compelling way. But the upside of it is also that, we know that almost 70% of our audience is broadband. And that is liberating in a way that for a long time we really struggled with. We'd do something cool and we'd know, hardly anyone is ever going to see this because, it was designed for T1 lines. Now we can. It's kind of the technological possibilities for us have opened up tremendously, and I think we're taking advantage of that really well right now.
And so, have you done media your whole working life, or multimedia, or what is your background?
I've done multimedia my entire professional life. I went to the University of Missouri Journalism School as a photojournalist, and was preparing for an exciting career in the trucking industry when this new thing called multimedia started happening. And I was lucky enough to move off into the multimedia world. I did online journalism at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and another number of other places. And I've been doing this mixed media or multimedia since 1994. And so the changes that I've seen in the technology are fascinating, but I think the more interesting thing to me is the change in the audience. Back then it was a very niche-oriented kind of a presentation where, very few people ever saw what we did. And today we are a mass medium.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you like to do outside of work?
Well, my wife and I spend a lot of time on our house. We've got a 100-year-old house that we're in the process of remodeling on. We like to do a little bit of travel here in the Northwest. It's just like everyone up here. It's such a gorgeous area, that it's great to be able to get out, even over a weekend and see, amazing wildlife, amazing scenery.
Do you have a favorite place up here to get away to?
I usually will load the dogs in the back of the pickup truck and try to find a dirt road somewhere and just drive to the end of it. I'm not really picky. It's funny. I've over the years I've traveled quite a bit. Doing stories all over Asia, Latin America and Europe, and so when I'm at home, it's kind of my opportunity to be a real homebody. I get a lot of kind of excitement and adventure through my career, which I'm feel really lucky for. But when I'm home, it's nice to just be able to lay on the couch and spend a little bit of time with my wife and relax.
So what would you say is the best thing about working at MSNBC?
Oh, the best thing about what we do at MSNBC is the fact that we're able to touch so many people. What we do, is seen by such a tremendous audience. I mean, we are larger in terms of users a month than any print publication, period.
Wow.
And so that means for us, that as long as we do our job, we produce compelling content that people are going to connect with, that we're going to touch millions of people. And that's really exciting. I mean, that's a wonderful thing that that MSNBC.com and internet media as a whole is really just starting to tap into.
That's great. Well, Andrew, thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that brings it to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
Stay tuned for next month's episode, where we'll cover Passport and .NET alerts.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.